If you haven't already, would you please hit the thumbs up button, the subscribe button and the notification bell, and then you'll get notified whenever I bring new content out. Thank you. Hi guys, hope you're doing okay. Welcome back to this next video. We're here at a location called Dunluce Castle as promised, and we're going to take a proper tour. Going to go in. Hopefully we'll get looked after when we get there, and we can get a tour guide to help us who's got a far better knowledge than I have. But have a look at this. Check the views out. Sorry about the wind, but we're right on the coast here, right on the edge of the cliff. So I'll see you in there guys. I'll get a tour guide and we'll go for a look round, and hopefully it can tell us all about it. See you in a minute. This is how the castle would have looked back in its time. Welcome back to one of my adventures. We've got Cormac here.
How you doing?
He's going to be giving us a tour today, and he's going to tell us all about the history of the castle, because I'm not 100% clued up on it and I don't want to waffle and sound stupid. So Cormac's the guy for that. He actually works here and is a tour guide, and he's very kindly said that he's going to take us on a little guided tour for you guys, so I hope you all like it. And let's get talking to Cormac and find out all about the history.
Okay, so Dunluce Castle has been inhabited for well over 1,000 years. The oldest evidence we have of people living here dates back to the Viking times, but we do know people have lived here long before. It's just archaeological evidence only goes back so far, because there was wooden dwellings before there was the stone dwellings, but we'll get into that later on. So in terms of recent history of Dunluce Castle, there was a Norman settlement placed here in the late 1100s, early 1200s, and it was inhabited by the Normans for over 100 years. Now, there was a Scottish invasion of Ulster in the early 1300s that pushed Norman power out of Ulster, and from there the Gaelic families managed to take control over the north coast once again.
Sorry about the helicopter guys,
No,
every time.
So basically the McQuillan family, they were based out of here from the mid 1300s onwards, and they were displaced by the MacDonalds in the 1550s. What you see here in this area was built from the 1550s onwards. A lot of the castle, the original castle, has fell into the sea or has been built on top of. But the main movers of the castle, the main family, was the MacDonalds, and they originally came from the Western Isles of Scotland, more specifically the Isle of Islay. So basically this family was invited over as a mercenary family, and whenever they became strong enough, they eventually took the castle from the McQuillans. But we'll get more into that later on. What I really want to talk about right now is just this little area round here. So the stone that I'm leaning up against this is a mountain step, and it belongs to the stables. So back in the day, if you can imagine, people were a lot shorter in those days. Irish people would have been about 5'5" in those times, so they needed some way to get onto their horses a lot easier. On top of that,
Perfect for me, mate. I'm 5'6".
fair enough. But a lord or a lady would have needed to get onto their horse pretty easily, and a male would have been wearing full armour set, and a lady would have been wearing a nice long dress, so they would have needed to keep themselves clean and have ease of getting on and off. Once you do go into the stables here itself, there's very little actually surviving apart from the partitions that you can see in the walls there, and that was basically the partition from the stalls where the horses were kept. And on the second level you can see the little holes in the wall where the wooden beams would have been for the second floor. Across the way over there is called the brew house, and at the time it was a very, very important part of the castle. In those days, how bacteria and stuff worked wasn't really understood. The people did understand that if they drank water straight from the river they would get sick. But they didn't know it was the bacteria getting them sick. What they did know is if they cooked it up and turned it into alcohol, they didn't get sick, so they did that quite often. So medieval diet would have been a very, very weak eel instead of water. And there's a whole section of the castle down there dedicated just to keeping eels and wines and the like. Because there was no real proper well where they could draw from during a siege, so they needed to have large supplies of alcohol to be able to keep themselves going. So I'll just push us through down into this area down here. This is the lodgings. Now, I haven't actually mentioned before, but this is the newest part of the castle. This was only built in about the 1620s or so, and then 20 years later the castle was attacked and destroyed. So this area didn't really have much of a chance to thrive. But this building over here where these people are standing is called the Lodgings, and basically that was where the Lord of Antrim would have brought his guests, and this is where they would have stayed. This wall here wasn't a defensive wall, it was actually a social barrier, so only certain people would have had the privilege to actually cross this barrier. There was a big wooden door there, and it would have obscured your view of the castle as well. And only, as I say, a certain privileged group of people would actually be allowed to go down as far as the bridge. Another thing that you should take note of is the amount of fireplaces that we actually have on the whole site. There's several dozen of them, and you actually get taxed on the amount of windows and fireplaces that you had in those days. That's why windows were quite small, as you can see there, because you got taxed on them. That's where the term daylight robbery comes from. The smaller the window, the less you get taxed.
Guys, I've just learned something new there. Unbelievable. Daylight robbery.
Yeah.
Now we know where it comes from, guys. That's awesome, mate. I never knew that, mate.
Yeah.
Look at this.
Another thing you should just take a note of there is you can see that the stable building is slightly older than the lodgings, because there's a window that looks right into the stables. So you can imagine someone that was really liked or loved their horse, and they would have got the room here so that they would actually be able to look into the stables at their horse. Down here, on the other side of that is a balcony, and it would have overlooked over this wall to the left the gardens. Now the gardens was where a lot of gambling and a lot of partying and stuff went on. The main sport of the day in the 1600s was 10-pin bowling, and I think Lord, his name was Randall Ogue, he had basically placed, it was a £5,000 bet on a single throw of the bowls ball. And in today's money, that's nearly £100,000, I think. So he had money to burn in those days. Now, as I say, the MacDonalds, they made their wealth from being a mercenary family. Once they did take the castle from the McQuillans before, they ventured out into other business ventures, mainly being fishing, believe it or not. There is two rivers that run either side of the castle, within a couple of miles of the castle, called the River Bann and the River Bush. And basically, on a day in 1600, you could pull over 30 tons of salmon out of both rivers. Now, today that sounds completely unheard of, and it sounds like a figure that I've just pulled out of nowhere, but in those days, salmon was incredibly abundant. And how the McDonalds made their money is they sold the rights to fish there, and also any surplus fish that they did have, they sold to the French and the Spanish. So that's where the beginning of their empire sort of happened. Now, I'm pretty sure this here is the the newest building in this entire area up here, and it's called the viewing room. Now, this is where the MacDonald Lord would bring his guests. He would bring them right here. He would put his arm out and he would say, "See the reach of our power," because over in the west, his allies, the O'Donnells, controlled the Donegal Peninsula. On a better day, you can see the Western Isles of Scotland over here that his other cousins did control, and you can't see it because of the Giant's Causeway headland to the right, but from here all the way to Larne, which is about 100,000 acres of land, all belong to the MacDonald family. And for a Gaelic family, an Irish family at the time, that was incredible for them to actually be able to control that and hold that. Another wee thing you should take note of is the fireplaces here on this side and on that side. This room was used as a subsidiary kitchen, and this is food would have been cooked down in the kitchen in the castle and brought up here to stay warm for the guests to eat. Now, this area here.
Guys, just check out this view. That is unreal. Sorry about the wind. Amazing.
So as you can see now, it's not a drawbridge, it's just a static bridge. Over the years and in the last attack on the castle, the drawbridge was destroyed, as well as the little ground that we had under there that was to support the bridge. It collapsed completely in the last attack of the castle, and only until the past 100 years or so, the castle, you couldn't get to it. There was no way to get to it. So large parts of it were preserved. That's why the castle is so preserved to this day, because no one could get over to it to take stones off the walls. That was the normal way of doing things. If you wanted to build your house in the 17 or 1800s, you didn't go and buy brick. You took brick and stone from destroyed buildings. Didn't matter if it was a castle, it didn't matter what it was free building material. That was just the attitude in those days.
Wow, I always wondered that, guys. Where's all the stone gone? How come it's ended up like this? Now I know, I'm finding loads out here. This is awesome.
Down on the right hand side there, you'll be able to see a sea cave. Now that sea cave goes below the castle and out to sea at the other side. And on a really, really calm day, not a day like this, that you could take a small rowing boat up below the castle, and it has been used to supply it in the past during sieges. And from what I'm told today, there is a small colony of bats living in there. Here is the Gatehouse. This is the first proper defensive measure of the castle. The first level was built by the McQuillan family, and the further two levels were built by the McDonalds. Now the McDonalds, I've said, were a Gaelic family. They're originally from Scotland, but they spoke the Irish language, they had the Irish culture, and they had the Catholic religion, so they would have been more allied with the Irish clans around here. So basically, whenever they took this castle, they still would have used Scottish architecture and the like, so they would have added that in there. Now, it wasn't for defensive reasons; it was just to show, you know, we come from this sort of we're cut from this cloth. We use this sort of architecture. If you want to just step through the Gatehouse here and take a look into the room to the left. This here was the stonemason's room. This is where the stonemason was based. Now you can imagine it took over 200 years for the castle to be built. It was a constant manoeuvre. So they always needed to have a stonemason or two here to be constantly repairing and building on what they've already done. You can see there is the remnants of what was a musket loop. That was a defensive measure, but it was filled in the 16th.
What's a musket loop?
A musket loop is basically a defensive measure. It's like a little hole in a wall, and it was enough for you to put your musket through and to be able to fire on somebody, for you to be safe at the same time. Now it was filled in with concrete and bricks, because the last lady of the castle actually didn't like having soldiers here, so she ordered the stonemason to fill in a lot of the musket loops. But ironically, 2 years later, the castle was attacked, and there was very little way to defend it.
What would have been here, Cormac? Do you know, just in this? Would that be
that was a partition for the second floor, so you can imagine a roof would have been above my head here. Each floor would have had a little window that would have overlooked, and that was another sort of
look at that,
way
guys,
for you to be able to look out and have a look about.
And how many floors is this?
This was a free floored. As I say, the first level was done by the Irish McQuillans, and then the next two was done by the McDonalds in the 1500s on. So a soldier, as I said, there would have been about 40 soldiers garrisoned here. Now they wouldn't have been allowed to stand in and around here. They would have had to stay in this defensive building, on this wall here.
Wow.
In that defensive tower, and there was a wall that connected that defensive tower to that one over there. The soldiers were not allowed to step down here. They had to stay at their posts or on the walls. Same with the servants. The servants weren't allowed to be around here. There was a walkway that outskirted the outside of the castle. and it went all the way around, and that was how servants were managed to be able to get in and out of the castle. Only the family here had the privilege to stand here where we stand right now. This is the curtain wall. Now take notice how this wall is the thickest of all 4 walls here. About 2 meters thick. Whereas if you look at that wall over there, it's only about a foot thick, just a bit thicker.
Guys, yeah, check that out.
The reason for that is the only way a cannonball would actually hit this wall is if it was coming from over there in the headlands. The castle sits too high on the rock for the gradient of a ship to actually be able to fire up. So there's no way a cannonball would be able to hit any of those walls there. The attack would always come from here. That's why you can see the wall has been repaired several times. You can see this slate. There was a blowout here, so slate was put in to level it off and make it safe again. You can see over here sandstone was put in as a repair measure. And then up there is red brick.
When would that have been?
So it could have been when Cromwell attacked in the 1650s, or it could have been a wee bit earlier than that, because this is gradual repair here. You know, this one could have been from the 1600s. This one could have been from a wee bit earlier.
That's crazy, isn't it, guys?
It was constantly built upon over the years.
And how many times was this attacked, this place, do you know?
Off the top of my head, I think 4 times, like successfully attacked. The first one was a man named John Perrott in 1584. He had taken a large number of soldiers with him. He was known as and it's worst time to have a
yeah, no, don't worry, mate, don't worry.
He was basically an English adventurer, and he basically got permission from Queen Elizabeth to help push the MacDonalds out of the area. So he brought his soldiers and landed at Portrush over there, as well as a single cannon, and he pulls it all the way around in the headland until he pulled up just over there, where he hammered the walls for 3 days with a cannon until the garrison surrendered.
Wow. Check this out, guys.
I was telling you about musket loops earlier. That's a good example of one right there. You can see that little hole. If you can imagine the barrel of a gun pointing out, and if you want to turn around and see the view that musket would have had, a clear line of sight all the way down there.
Yeah.
It was all about survival in those days. The building itself was finished in 1620, and it took several years to build. Now, as you can see, a lot of the sandstone has been pulled away, and it was actually sold off by Cromwell's army, as well as a large inventory of the contents of the castle was sent over to England and sold. But there is one single window that does survive, and it's just up in that corner up there. It was put in 1620. It's a 401-year-old window.
Wow. Let's go take a look. Can we?
Yes.
This one up here in the top corner. Guys, look at that.
So it survived quite well for 400 years.
400-year-old window. Would that have been a big arch window there? Or is
yes.
that a doorway going
yes,
into
that was a doorway that room in there was the buttery and the pantry that I was telling you about that held all the wines and beers. There is a second floor that would have took you into the second floor in here. You can see how high the roof would have been in here. Because of how high, you remember the stables, the roof was only just above my head, whereas it's about 3 times the height of my head now. You needed to know where your taxes were going, basically. This is where you came to negotiate your taxes for the year. So you needed to see where it was going. I told you there was a large inventory of things taken in here. There was Persian rugs from Iran, now from the 1500s. That's incredible because we're on the north coast of Ireland, which in those times was the middle of nowhere. It's still the middle of nowhere today. So to have that is incredible. There was also tapestries on the wall, and if you were to lay them down in a straight line, they would have went for 3/4 of a mile. So that's how rich this family was. And you can see the absolutely massive fireplace over there.
Let's go and have a look, guys.
So a characteristic of fireplaces in those days, there was the slate that was standing up there.
Yeah, I was just going to ask about this slate here.
Yeah, that acts as a flue, so the air is constantly going in below it. Instead of you having to blow on it whenever you're trying to start it, the air was already being cycled through.
Oh.
So it was quite high tech. It's nearly more high tech than fireplaces today.
Check that out, guys.
I told you earlier on about the souterrain, and that's the oldest evidence there is of people living here. That dates back to Viking times, so the late 800s, the early 900 AD. So it was actually someone's job to dig out of the rock and chisel a little tunnel that went below here, and below here, and down below this tower here. Now it predated this tower, that's why this tower was built here. It actually goes into a little cavern that drops about 3 meters below this tower. And if you can imagine a wooden fort instead of a stone tower, so you can imagine the Vikings off in the distance over there getting ready to attack the castle. What the family here would have done is they would have crawled into this tunnel and covered that hole, and they would have set their fort on fire. That way the Vikings would think that their allies had already attacked this place, and they'd move on to the next area. The Vikings didn't really have time to investigate such things, so they needed to be in and out. So over the 200 years and every summer that they raided the coast, they never once figured out that's where they were hiding. So it worked out quite well. If you want to actually have a wee look inside,
check the tunnel out, guys.
The reason this is closed is because you can't social distance during COVID, so we've had to close it off. But since you're by yourself, it should be fine.
Check that out, guys. Special treatment.
So stamp your foot whenever you go in, just to see how hollow it is.
Damn.
And take a note of all of the names that have been etched into the walls over the past 400 years or so.
Is that how old they are, these names?
Yes, some of them are can be about 400 years old. Some of them are from last week nearly. This wall over here, it says LFC 2021.
Alright, got ya.
Just up here.
Uh-huh.
But the main thing about this room here is you can see the lines in the walls. Up here.
That's almost like an M in it.
Yeah, that's someone put their name into the plaster. You can see Belfast written there.
Oh yeah.
And their initials are in the wall. But these lines here date back to the late 1400s, whenever this tower was originally built. That was, you put your scaffolding up against the wall, and that held your plaster in place.
How old's that name there?
I couldn't tell you.
Because that's
usually
kind of like...
Yeah, it's like J.
That's like olden day lettering, is it?
Yeah.
Or is that
Oh,
just
there's one just here. It's got like Roman numerals and everything.
like... Look at the views from here, guys.
As I say, this was just a place for soldiers to be garrisoned. There was no real threat of attack in this tower at all. So I'll just close this up again. If you want to actually go up the tower there and have a look at the views.
Yeah.
You can't. Oh, wait, you can. You can.
So yeah, this is the kitchen here. You can see it has that characteristic slate where the fireplace used to be. This was a big massive fireplace here. This would have been used specifically for spit roasting a pig or a cow or a sheep. And it would have been the job of a 7 or 8 year old servant's child to stand with a shield in one arm and rotate the pig or the cow with the other arm. And that's what they would have done for years. That would have been their job. until they got old enough to do something more specific or complicated.
That's the oven, guys. What would have been cooked in there? Just
Bread, just.
bread.
There's more ovens down in the back of the castle, as well as a butchery, so we think they kept the cooking meat and bread separately. You can still see sort of the red tint from whenever it was used just in there.
No way. Seriously? Well, is that the blood staining? What would that be, the red tint?
Well, it could be from blood, or it could be what's left over from building materials and stuff, because blood was used in making like the cement of the time. You know, you would have used sand and shingle from the beach, you would have had limestone powder, and you would have had the blood of an ox or a cow, and basically they would have mixed together, and whenever they dried they became like a concrete solution. So it could be part of it there, it could be blood stained onto the stone.
Wow.
I'd like to imagine it as, it makes it sound a lot more dramatic.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it?
Now this is the entrance into the inner ward here. This was the most private part of the castle.
You're going to get some wind here, guys, so it's got some more exposed.
So this area was all cut off into different rooms. In the later stages of the castle they tried making it somewhat self-sufficient, so they tried having, basically here would have been a dress hemmers where you would have got your dress or your clothes, your suits and all made for you. Over in that corner was the cobblers where you would have got your shoes made or repaired. In that far corner over there I mentioned about the butchery, and in that corner over there there is actually no, there's nothing in the plans of the castle to say what it was, so it's completely up to interpretation what that corner was used for. But it does hold the entrance to that walkway that I was talking about earlier, so maybe that's just what it was for.
I think that's where all the single ladies hang out.
Oh yes. Over here is the bathroom, just where these people are walking into there. So the meals of the castle would have used that. The ladies would have had a chamber pot that they would have went in, and their chambermaid would have emptied it out in there. Now, from what I'm told, the toilet system was actually quite high tech for its time. You were able to actually flush over the cliff, which was quite revolutionary for the time nearly, because in those days you basically dug a hole, and whenever you were done you packed it down with hay or straw. Over here what you did was you had a hollowed out log of wood, and basically you did your business, and whenever you were finished you poured water on the top of that, and that washed out over the cliff, which for us that sounds kind of silly, but in those times that was completely revolutionary. It was the height of cleanliness.
There it is, guys. Imagine that, you're going for a nice walk on the beach and someone flushes the business out of this hole. Guess what?
So I've really showed you all of the castle. Where this black gate is, there used to be about another 40 foot of castle, and what happened surrounding that area is what has made this castle somewhat famous. They talk about part of the kitchen falling into the sea in a stormy night in 1639, but as you've just witnessed 5 minutes ago, the kitchen is still standing back behind us.
Yeah.
So you know, whenever you tell a lie enough times, it doesn't matter if it's true or not. That's sort of the case with the story of the kitchen falling into the sea. Because there was something here, we just don't know what it was. There was nothing written in the plans. It could have been something as simple as some extra servants' quarters, or it could have been a subsidiary kitchen, but it just doesn't make sense in the fact that you passed one over there and then the other one up in the lodgings that we discussed earlier. So we just don't know what that was, but it's easy just to say that it was the kitchen and be done with it.
What about like a defence system or a lookout place?
There was no real need for a defence system up here because, as I said earlier, the cannons from a ship could not, the cannonballs would not reach up here. We're too high of a gradient.
Right.
So that's why the walls are so thin and all that. There's no real way to scale this part of the castle either, unless you had help from the top. So we do reckon it was just something along the lines of some subsidiary housing for the servants.
Would that have been? Is that another?
So
What's that part
that's
of?
just another wee sort of corner area.
Is
But
that
that
like
gives
a-
you the best view off the castle. I let you go up there yourself. There's a nice little sea yard there too.
Oh, in here.
Yes, just there. And then you can see
I
the
so
sea
that's a
yard off the sea.
fireplace, is it?
Yes, this would have been another fireplace here. So there isn't really much else I can tell you about this place. I've taken you through the whole castle. Where we stand right now would have been the courtyard of the inner ward. So there's actually an artist's interpretation over here of what he thought it would have looked like. But if you can imagine, this is an open air area and sort of small thatched buildings on either side of us. But at one point, believe it or not, this area was flat. But I'm not sure if you can see it on the camera, but there is about a ½ metre drop between where the stairs are and the bottom over there.
Yeah, you sure can, guys.
And the reason for that is just the castle is too heavy for the rock it sits on, so it's slowly but surely just sinking.
What would that have been? Yeah.
Oh, so this was just put in as a drain because there was a lot of water retention here.
All right, yeah.
So the stonemasons just put this drain in here. It isn't actually part of the original castle.
Okay, yeah, sure.
Because a lot of water would have collected in that corner and that corner over there.
Yeah.
But no, it's not hard to imagine that the castle is slowly sinking away because there is a sea cave right below us. You know, you can imagine it's going the gap there slightly. Basalt isn't a very good material to build on anyway, but the builders 400 years ago weren't really thinking about long term.
Yeah.
In that sort of sense. But no, that's really all I can give you about the actual castle history itself.
That's awesome, mate.
There's a few wee bits and pieces, like at the time when this castle was up in its prime, it was whitewashed both inside and out, and the reason for that was you would be able to see it from the Western Isles of Scotland, from Donegal. You know, it was a position of power, it was a seat of power, and the family wanted to portray that to its allies and its enemies alike, that they were a powerful family not to be messed with. But yeah, that's really all I can give you at the moment.
That is awesome, guys, isn't it?
I assume the bottom floor would have been kept for consumables and your wine and stuff, and then you can see the partitions for the second floor and a fireplace, so there would have been a servant who would have worked in here. Now what you did was you worked the daylight away, and once it got dark you went upstairs to your dwelling and you stayed there the rest of the evening until it got daylight again, and that was the servant's life.
Wow. There's a 400-year-old window, guys. Is that right?
Yes. So you remember I told
What
you-
would that have been? Do you see, like, the top
So
bit
that
there?
was the balcony, or that took you onto the second level that I was telling you about. So the stairs there would have went right above the doorway, and that would have took you up to the second level. So you would have been actually able to go onto the roof area. So I told you earlier about blood was used in the building process. So just over here you can see the red tint in the wall, where that's actually the blood is sort of oxidising through.
That is actually a red tint, guys.
Now it's just right beside the reconstructed part. This is all new, but all of the mortar mix and stuff, that's all original. You can see the red actually coming through, and that's known as actually bleeding through. This today is due to a man named Oliver Cromwell. He brought his army over. Now he wasn't here personally himself. He left that to one of his generals. His name was General Monroe. He was a Scottish Covenanter, and basically they besieged the castle and destroyed it with cannon, and it was almost immediate. When Cromwell's soldiers came here, they did what is known as slighting the castle, so they took away the defensive capabilities of the castle. You saw the big strip of open wall down there. That was due to Cromwell's forces. He made sure there was no way to defend it. He destroyed the drawbridge, so there was no way to re-garrison it, and he pulled out all of the sandstone out of the walls and took it back to England with him. The reason being is sandstone.
How did he get it to England?
Took it by boat. It's easy enough. He had a whole army. I don't know where he took it from. There's a book up in the office. There's a historian named Jean. Oh, what's her name? She did a whole inventory of the stuff that was taken from the castle in 1652, 1651, and it was sold at auction over there. If you're up there on the way out, I'll be able to show you it. And it's a whole list of stuff. It had the tapestries, and it had the Persian rugs, and it had all of the valuables and stuff that he had. They sold it off at auction, and they made millions from it, so they did. But as I say, the sandstone, you could shape it into any shape you want, and you could throw it into a wall, you could do whatever you want with it. It was very, very, very valuable. Yes.
To start off,
Yeah. Here in 1651, led by General Monroe, and basically the castle surrendered to him. It was destroyed and slighted. That's where all the damage that you see here was done by. The MacDonald family was, quotation marks, impoverished, so they couldn't fix the castle. They moved to another place called Glenarm, and they built another castle there with what was left of their wealth, and that's where their descendants actually live there to this day. And they're one of the only, if not the only Irish clan or Gaelic clan to actually survive those wars and still be able to remain safely in Ireland. About 50 years prior to this was a thing called the Flight of the Earls, where the Irish equivalent to their aristocracy, their kings, had to flee because they had lost what was known as the 9 Years' War against the English. So they fled first to Spain and then to Rome, where they hoped to get an army from the Pope to be able to come back to Ireland and take it back for themselves. But they were used as a bargaining chip there, and they weren't allowed to go home again. So they eventually died of old age in Rome. Whereas the MacDonalds flourished, they became part of the British establishment and the British ascendancy, and they became almost an integral part to modern history, and not just in Northern Ireland but in Ulster and the whole of Ireland in general. So the MacDonalds are a very, very influential family with a rich history, and you can still see it to this day.
Guys, they didn't invent the fast food, it's the wrong McDonald's, yeah?
That's right.
This is impressive, guys. Hey guys, we're so lucky having a good tour guide there. I hope you really enjoyed that. What an awesome job the guide did there. He let us in for free, didn't have to pay, gave us a free tour. I looked after him, I gave him some money at the end as a goodwill gesture. That's pretty awesome, isn't it? Oh, look at that. Beautiful place, stunning scenery. If you don't mind, please subscribe, hit the thumbs up, and leave a comment on what I'm stood on the wall here. So thank you very much, and I was going to dive today, but the sea is far too rough. I'm on my own, I don't fancy taking that on my own, it's far too rough. So I will be back to dive around the castle. Thank you for joining me. Please hit the thumbs up and leave a nice comment. Thank you. Thank you very much for joining me, and I'll see you on the next one. Till next time.